This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. What a fun guest today. Dana Cavalea, a high-performance coach. How did he originally cut his teeth? As a 19-year-old intern with the New York Yankees. He quickly moved up the ladder and has had the chance to interact with those Hall of Fame names that we all know. A-Rod, Derek Jeter, Joe Torre. He knows them all. He's had a chance to learn from them all. And look, even if baseball's not your thing, it sure as hell my thing. I've loved baseball my whole life. But even if baseball's not your thing, if sports are not your thing, the takeaway from Dana Cavalea's insights, gold. And plus, what a fantastic story to be there when the Yankees win a World Series, to be recognized as the best strength coach in Major League Baseball. Now, when you hear best strength coach, let me take a step back. Dana comes at this from the physical and mental side. You're going to get both perspectives in this conversation. In fact, probably even more mental. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dana Cavalea. Dana, my opening question out of the gate. I have to know, give me a time, give me a place, give me your age. How in the world did you make it to come first work for the New York Yankees?
Well, I started as an underperforming baseball player, at least to my standards and the standards of scouts. That's how I got involved with the field of baseball. I love the game, but ultimately I got to a point in my journey where I realized I wasn't good enough to make it as far as I wanted to go. I grew up in the New York area, as you could tell probably by my accent. I was a Yankee fan growing up, but when my baseball career was coming to an end, I had to make a decision for myself as to where I wanted to go to college, what I wanted to do, what I wanted to study. That took me to the University of South Florida down in Tampa, which happens to be the spring training home of the New York Yankees. You know, I always had vision as a young guy. And really, my journey started. I have a degree in sports medicine, exercise science, but when I was getting started, I started really as an intern with the football team at USF. One February, early in my college career when I was 19 years old, I headed over to Steinbrenner Field to watch spring training. I'm taking pictures through a chain link fence with guys like Derek Jeter and Mariano Rivera, Andy Pettitte, all these great players. Literally that day, I went back to my university internship, and the head strength coach with the Yankees says, with the USF says, hey, can you come into my office? I want to talk to you. He says, listen, I just got a call from the strength coach with the Yankees, and he's looking for a guy to basically hand out towels, hand out water, and clean the weight room. Would you have any interest in that? And I said, as a matter of fact, I just got back from there, and I would love that opportunity. And literally the next day, I pull up in my hoopty of a car. I park, I walk in, and they say, hey, are you Dana Cavalea? I said, yeah. They threw a credential around my neck that had clubhouse and field access on it. They threw me in Yankees gear. And that same field I was taking a picture of a day earlier, I was now in the middle of team stretch. There's all these players, Roger Clemens, Derek Jeter, like I said, Mariano, all these unbelievable players that I grew up watching and, honestly idolizing.
Was this mid to late 90s?
This was actually 2002.
Okay.
It's a dream come true for a guy from New York that loved the game of baseball and, again, grew up truthfully just watching these guys play and shine. And again, I always say I was an underperforming player, so I relied heavily on coaching, but I always wanted to know what was the edge? Like, what were these pros doing that I wasn't? I learned that I was actually doing probably way too much, and I didn't trust myself enough. And that was the lesson that I took as a young man, 19, watching these guys. I said, wow, if I would have known that years earlier, it would have been a different game.
So let me keep you at that for a second. Let's start this journey, because here you are. You're describing a story as an intern, basically towel guy cleaning up the weights. I'm holding your book in my hands. The lead blurb says, Dana has been the guy that has kept me healthy most of my career. If you're looking to perform at the highest level, nobody is better. Alex Rodriguez. Now that's a nice jump. That's a hell of a story. Really. I mean, when you go from being the towel guy to one of the best baseball players ever saying, hey, this guy's got his stuff together. Let's start to piece this together. Like, what was happening? So 2002, how did it start to unfold? How quickly did your involvement start to unfold where the players really started to take to you? Explain how that journey happened under the Steinbrenner roof.
Yeah. So for me, I like I said, I was the towel weight room cleanup guy, and I didn't have many other skills because I was just getting started in my field of study. I knew what I did as a player, but obviously that didn't work out too well. So I didn't want to start showing the guys what I used to do, because that the results of that probably wouldn't have been that good. This was back in a time when, core training and functional training was just starting to show itself and showcase itself, to the market. I got hurt as a player and I knew my training was wrong. So I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to learn as much as I can about core training and functional type training. And that's going to be my differentiator. And that's what I'm going to use to build some really strong relationships with players. So literally every day I would go home and learn as much as I can, teach myself, try different things. So when a player would walk in, I'd say, hey, can I take you through some core? I mean, after the core, I knew nothing. I was very short. I would have shorted myself. But ultimately, that is where I started to build the relationship one by one with a player. Hey, let me take you through something. Let me take you through something. And, when you're working with people physically, you're also working with them mentally, and you're creating and building a relationship. And what I realized was, if they gave me a chance to take them through just this maybe 5% of their routine, they would then give me the opportunity to maybe take another 10, 20% as I went along. And that's really, really what happened. And, one of the players that really changed my career was Jorge Posada, in that I took him through something. He liked it. Ultimately, he said to me, hey, listen, I know this was actually during my first season. And he said, I know we're headed towards the end of the season, but I'd love you to train me in Miami. And when I started for the off season, and when I started working with Jorge, his best friend is Derek Jeter. And then I knew Jorge introduced me to Derek, and then I really started working with Derek. And then when you have the captain, you have everybody.
So this is your first year, essentially. And you say you showed him some things. Okay, I'm Jorge Posada. I'm a freaking all-star catcher. I mean, Derek Jeter, he's a Hall of Fame. What did you initially show these guys? I mean, like literally, what did you show these guys that got their attention? I mean, these guys they've seen and heard everything from everyone. They must have liked your approach and your personality. That's a given. But what were you giving them functionally, operationally? What were you giving them that they were saying, man, this guy's got something different?
I'd say two things. Number one, I was giving them the support and attention, but in a way that wasn't, as a fan, it was hitting them straight, telling them what they needed to hear. Because at this point, I was starting to become, much more secure, and I was definitely an expert next to them in my subject matter. So I started to show them things typically based on when they had pain or they had something bothering them. I was able to give them one or two things that would help relieve the pain, that would help them feel good for that particular game so they can go out there and play. So it was really finding their pain and actually giving them solutions to reduce that pain or discomfort. Because during the season, you get beat up, man. You take a beating just from the amount of games you play and the intensity that's behind it. Really, it was, hey, you got something going on. Here's the solution for it. And then we would literally talk through it. And the other thing that I did differently than most is, I had a guy tell me one time, you build your relationships with players outside of the field, outside of the stadium. I used to go to lunch, I used to go to breakfast, and I used to go to dinner with players quite a bit. I realized, again, if they know, like, and trust you, that's where it all begins. They got to trust you. This is their body. This is their machine that makes them the money. And they have to know that you know what you're talking about, and they have to trust you. And if you can win on those three things, and you have the subject knowledge to back it up, then you win. And that ultimately is what I did over and over again, player by player.
This early in your career, though, was it a little surprising to you? We were already rattling off names in this conversation that any baseball fan knows, and they know how important those names are to the history of Major League Baseball. So was it a little surprising to you early on that here you are, rather new, and you're able to impart wisdom to guys that not only they've got a certain amount of experience. I mean, obviously they have figured out somewhere or another to become professional athletes. They've got some semblance, some understanding of how to take care of themselves to some degree. Was it a little surprising to you that perhaps there were as many holes in their understanding? And I'm not talking about any particular person, just overall professional baseball players, that there was a hole in their understanding that you were able to fill. That must have been a little surprising early on.
Well, for me, what was interesting, we were both going into a very new frontier in that the players that I'm mentioning, right, they were now heading into their 30s, which I know people say 30s, that's pretty young. But in baseball years and pro sports years, the body is experiencing some things that it hadn't experienced before. You know, when you're in your 20s, you're borderline bionic. You can do anything. But when you get into your 30s, you start to deal with things that you haven't dealt with before. I was also dealing with players that had a level of vulnerability in that, hey, I never experienced this before. I never felt this before. And when you start to feel your body change, from there, you can actually start to doubt yourself. If you don't have your body working at full tilt, full capacity, it's very hard to stand in the box in a me versus you environment as a hitter or a pitcher and feel like you have that competitive edge. And so much of sports is built on that alpha, I'm going to beat you. And it was up to me to really help these guys keep themselves together so they can go out there and feel that way. Like, hey, you know what? I'm going to go out there and win today. And that's why so much of what I did was blending the training with like cognitive behavioral therapy and also making them feel like the Iron Men that they were. That was really my trifecta that I used. You know, even though they were pros, they were experiencing some new things, and I had to keep them up. I had to keep them going. I had to keep them focused and energized and feeling powerful. And that was a big part of my game.
Let's dive into somebody that you talk about in your book in particular that I think all baseball fans will know, and that is the greatest closer in the history of baseball, Mariano Rivera. You've had a chance to work with him, very up close and personal to work with him. You learn from him too, because this is the guy, you know, this is ice in the veins. I mean, anyone that knows something about baseball, I mean, to go out and consistently close it down, win the game. There's a mental side to baseball if people have played any amount of time. There's a mental side of baseball to where, you know, you might be looking at one guy who looks exactly the same physically, but the 6 inches between the ears is all the difference. Why don't you relay some of the insights and share some of the story that you explain about Mariano in your book?
Yeah, the story I always tell is, you know, I remember in 1995, so I'm dating myself just a little bit, when Mariano ended up taking the mound for the first time for the New York Yankees, skinny little Panamanian kid. You watch him take the mound and you say, who the heck is this guy?
He was replacing an all-star closer.
This was actually before that.
Okay.
In John Wetland. But so in 1995, Mariano Rivera and John Wetland, Mariano was throwing the 7th and the 8th, and John Wetland was throwing the 9th. But in 1995, Mo got his call up. So you see this skinny little kid, Panamanian kid, and you say, man, who the heck is this guy? And then all of a sudden he reaches that arm back and he's throwing fire like I've never seen before. But ultimately, what you saw in him was a guy that was really unfazed by the moment. And I explained earlier, listen, I was a baseball player, and outside of lacking some of the talent, I was a mental midget next to some of these guys. And I saw this guy with this confidence. And as a young man, I said, wow, look at that. That's amazing. When you watched Mo the next year, 96, he got even stronger and more convicted and better. And every year he'd get better and better and better. And I kept my eye on this guy because at the time I was actually in high school and I was watching him and trying to learn as much as I could. Anyway, fast forward a bunch of years, actually probably about 5 years ago, and I'm at his house. You know, we're in his basement. I'm stretching him and doing some soft tissue work on him to help him relax and unwind a bit. I say, Mo, you know what? I have to ask you a question. He says, what? You know, with a little bit of a smug look and an attitude. I said, you know, I remember in 1995 when you took the mound, and I got to say, it was pretty unbelievable to see. But how do you do it, man? Like, how do you do it? The biggest situations, game on the line, and they call on you. How do you do it and not melt? And he tells me, he goes, buddy, he goes, I do 3 things. He goes, number 1, I slow everything down. Number 2, I quiet the noise. And number 3, I throw 1 pitch at a time. And he says, I control the volume. I control the knob that controls the volume, and I control the light switch. I determine what happens. In that moment, he explained to me that he was unfazed by any external stadium noise, what was happening. It didn't matter. He had a relationship between him and the glove, and that was it. And I said, well, that's great. But what about the big situations like, World Series? And he gave me a line that pretty much changed my life forever. And he said, listen, there are no big situations. We decide what situations are big. We decide what we give life to. But every situation in your life is the same. You decide how much energy you give to it.
I mean, if you're open and you're an ambitious, creative, adventuresome person who wants to make things happen, when you read that line from Mariano Rivera and you really digest it as to what it means, it really does. It's a changer.
That was it for me. I mean, I was the guy, and I always like to give examples because I listen, I'm not perfect and I never was. But I always like to say, like, hey, I was the guy that would overthink things, or something would get in my head and I'd obsess over it, or I'd say, I got this big speech to do, or I have this big thing, I'm taking the field for the first time, and I'd make it this mountain. And when I heard him say that, I said, that will be all. I won't be doing that anymore. Every moment will be approached in the same way, with the same disposition, the same demeanor, and the same conviction. Instead of saying, oh my God, I got this, now I got to step it up even more. And it has helped me tremendously. And it was a game changer for me. And to hear it from him, a guy that isn't just speaking on theory or something he wrote in a book, but a guy that I got a chance to watch from his first game to his last game as a player, up close and personal. I got to see it live every single night. And I got to actually be in there in the battle with him and to see how he did it. And I'm telling you, and you've seen him, he didn't let the moment catch him. Never.
I have to share with you, I just watched this documentary with this guy, Alex Honnold, the climber who just went up El Capitan.
Oh, I heard about that.
The free solo, so no ropes or anything. And he's got kind of a line in there, or either it was in the Joe Rogan interview, and he basically talks about, look, if my adrenaline is off the hook, something's wrong, meaning that shouldn't be there. It's kind of very similar to what you're saying with Rivera. It's the same mindset. You shouldn't have those ups and downs. It's trying to find that consistent mental place.
Yep, and that's actually a chapter I have in my book that says never get too high and never get too low. And when I started to compare players that were going to be first ballot Hall of Famers versus everybody else, they were able to control their energy and control their demeanor, disposition, attitude better than anybody else. I mean, these were the most consistent people that I've ever seen. And that was the differentiator. That was the difference.
That's an interesting point. Let me keep you there for a second. So not to talk about the guys that did not become first ballot, but it's, as a casual fan, we see the names, we see the salaries. I mean, look, baseball is a crazy thing. You can be an okay professional baseball player and make a lot of money. So the money doesn't necessarily tell you something. I mean, you had to have had a chance to see a tremendous number of guys, big league players. They're already the best of the best. But as you just noted, they had something wrong on the mental side. What were some of the most common issues that the guys that could not get over the hump and could not become that consistent all-star? What were the most common mental errors or conditions they were leaving themselves in?
It's the same as a lot of people just in the general population. Self-doubt is a big one. Being able to fail and then get back in there and kind of forget the failure. And I know we were talking about Mariano, but I was literally at his house 2 weeks ago, and he said, listen, I want you to do me a favor. Anytime you speak, I want you to talk about failure. He said, because I want you to tell this story that, when I gave up the World Series back in, I want to say maybe in 2001, he said, I couldn't wait to get back on the mound. He said, and that's the difference between certain players. He goes, there's guys that fail and they want to go hide. They want to go under the carpet. They want to go under the stadium and never be seen until the next year, or, they're ashamed of their failure. He said, but me, I wanted to get out there again. He goes, I was just pissed off that I had to wait a whole offseason to get back out on the mound, and I couldn't redeem myself the next night. So the biggest thing is, you have a convicted attitude versus an attitude of self-doubt. And the great players, they are able to just complete the moment. Hey, I failed in this moment. That doesn't make me a failure, and I can't wait to get back out there and run it down this guy's throat. So that's the one attitude. Where the other one is, I just failed. Oh man, I hope I get a chance to get out there again. I'm not sure if I even want to. It's a lot of that those self-defeating thoughts that take place in the other player. They start doing things that they haven't done before to make up for things. You'll see players that don't work out extremely hard after they have failing moments start trying to work out harder to make up for it. It's just, you see really strange behavior where the greats, it's business as usual. Failure is a part of the sport, and they accept it as such.
And the interesting thing about baseball too, as a team sport, it's still very individual. So even though you can be sitting there as a fellow player, not you, but a fellow pro player, and looking at one of the all-time greats that's sitting down the bench from you, he's not necessarily going to guide you. You kind of have to have that eye of the tiger, so to speak. It's like, because it's very competitive. If you don't do it, there's another guy standing in line all the way down AAA, AA, single A, rookie leagues, ready to take your place.
And that's what you honestly, I mean, you nailed it there. That's actually what you can't focus on. But that's where so many guys, that's where their head goes. Hey, I failed, and there's 5 guys that could replace me. Or, hey, I'm in the last year of my contract. They start focusing on all the external variables instead of just staying within themselves and, again, controlling the volume and controlling the light switch. And that's what a lot of guys struggle with. But the best of the best, they understand that you're never going to bat 1,000. You're never going to have a perfect ERA. You're just going to have to go out there and do your best and give it all you got and trust yourself. And they don't get overly excited and overly down. It's just, they stay even. They keep that middle line nice and flat. Other people are going up. Other people are going down. But it's just a common theme that I've seen. And I've seen it with CEOs and executives too.
I want to ask some questions about training in a second. Training that you witnessed and you've helped on from a baseball perspective, but also just a life perspective that everyone can have a takeaway. But I want to ask a few questions about some of the names that we've already talked about. And perhaps you can share something that you took away, an experience, an anecdote, something you learned from them. You've already mentioned Mariano. But for example, I talked about him at the top of the podcast on the back of your book. What's your takeaway from a guy like A-Rod? I mean, here's the guy I don't know if anybody's ever going to make more money contractually in baseball than A-Rod. I just don't know if it's ever going to happen again. And of course, he's got some bad press for things that have happened. And to go off of my soapbox for a second, the thing that I don't like about the bad press that he got is frankly, we're never going to know exactly who. And I always tell my friends is like, look, don't get too excited about trying to condemn some baseball player that might have got some bad press, because I will guarantee you across every damn Hall of Fame and Olympic gold medals that have been won over the decades, plenty of people that we consider heroes were doing things behind the scenes and we will never know. Is that a fair shake?
That is 100% true.
It's got to drive some of the current guys crazy.
Guys are still going down.
Let me keep it at A-Rod for a second. And I want to go back to what your big takeaway, not the bad press stuff. I mean, look, I could have taken the same things that he was accused of taking, and I never could have hit like he hit. So what did you take away from your experiences with him, the good, positive stuff that you really said, man, that's why this guy should be in the Hall of Fame?
First of all, his love for the game is greater really than any other player I've ever seen. I mean, he loves baseball. He's a guy that, he would watch the game unfold before it unfolded. He was really good at understanding the situational part of the game. But the other thing is, too, it's just the standard that he held himself to as a player. Again, a guy like Alex, he was a worker, man. It wasn't like he said, hey, I'm going to take some stuff and I'm going to just, mail it in. This was a guy that worked. He was probably one of the hardest working players. And again, I'm not supporting what he did, but I will tell you, I do understand it in that, so many players, a lot of these guys, they come from nothing and they have an opportunity to earn enough that will set their family line up for generations to come. And I think that's what motivates a lot of guys. It's not just the money side, but it's what that money can provide.
I'm not some Weasley baseball writer that will ever condemn these guys for doing this. This is just pro sports. This is what happened. And you know what? Like I just said a moment ago, I could have taken all the steroids under the sun and I could never hit like these guys do. So I really sometimes the critics get so far out there, they don't even know what they're talking about because they never played.
Exactly, 100%. And, you think about a guy like Alex. I mean, this guy was a first-round pick as an 18-year-old, I want to say in 1992. And he was in the big leagues at 18. That's how crazy it was. He basically bypassed the entire minor league system, or went through the entire minor league system in a matter of months, and was in a Seattle Mariners uniform.
And he was like the best player in the league almost right then and there.
Yeah. So that's the crazy part. I mean, as an 18-year-old, you look at him, he was a scrawny kid. He was still a very, very powerful player. He was he hit for power. He was stealing more bases back then. Defensively, he was great. I mean, so you're dealing with a guy he's the 1% of the 1%. I mean, it's just freakish. And, when you look at the contracts that he's had are a reflection of his ability. His draft position was a reflection of his ability. And honestly, everybody was right. Everybody that paid him was right. And the guy that drafted him and the organization that drafted him, they were also right. So everybody won. Now, I did a talk with him a couple weeks ago. Actually, I'm dating. It was in September now. But we were on stage. We were I had to actually interview him. I said, Alex, what do you regret? Or tell us a little bit more about the situation. You got popped. You got in trouble. You lost money. What happened? And he said something really interesting. He says, listen, not to make an excuse. He goes, but I grew up without a father in Miami. My mother worked 3 jobs. He said, I just never got a spanking as a kid when I did something wrong. He says, so I had to get a spanking by Major League Baseball, by the fans. And it was a $30 million spanking that I had to take for my actions. He goes, but, it was something that I learned from. And I'm glad it happened to me because I was able to really be real and show people, listen, I made a mistake. And I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect because I just felt like that's what I had to do. And he goes, now I took my hits. I got my spanking, and it really helped me kind of ground myself in a different way.
I got to tell you, he's must-watch TV right now. I watched a clip the other day with him and David Ortiz talking about hitting, and you can't turn it off.
He's a great baseball mind, but ultimately, I tip my cap to anybody that could turn the page on a negative, right? And again, you go through everybody's life, you're going to find negatives. You're going to find things that maybe they're not proud of, and they're probably not proud of. And we all have those moments. It's just guys like him, it's much more of a public matter than it would be for guys like us.
Like you say, you describe it in your book, you can be a victim of circumstances or a beneficiary of circumstances.
Yep. And he is saying, hey, listen, I was a victim in that I was publicly humiliated, but I did that to myself. But he also became the beneficiary of those circumstances because now he's found a different career. He's also been able to talk with players behind the scenes about his negative actions and how they should probably stay away from it. He's in a new lane now.
Let me take you to the skipper, the big dog at that time, Joe Torre. So I can imagine we could probably have a multi-hour or multi-day conversation about lessons and wisdom that you picked up from watching him and hearing from him. But why don't you try and give some highlights for the audience, for those that perhaps know a little bit about baseball, and why was he so good? I mean, there was a lot of talent on those World Series winning teams, and someone had to manage all those personalities. Oh my gosh, tremendous effort there. But what was the real secret to Torre? I mean, what did he really know about people that made him so good?
I think what he knew about people is that you need to treat each person as an individual. You need to treat each person as an individual. And every player, regardless of their ability and talent, had very different emotional needs. And what Joe Torre was a master of, and again, baseball is a very alpha, it's a hard sport, it's a chip on the shoulder type environment. It's not a hug it out type of place. It's just not that. But what Joe did was he brought to that team just the feeling of, hey man, somebody cares about me. We used to call him the Godfather. That was his nickname. And it would always be kind of pull you in his office, whether you were a clubhouse kid who was responsible for hanging uniforms and jerseys up and doing laundry, all the way to a player like Derek Jeter. Even myself, my grandmother passed away during one of the seasons, and we sat in the office and talked about it. He brought a human element to a very, very competitive gladiator type arena. And that was it, man. There was really, outside of that, you just knew he cared. That was a big thing, but did it in a very professional way, would never call you out publicly if he wasn't happy with something. But he'd also be the guy that calls you in the office just to see how you're doing.
I love this one line, and it kind of is right there in the Tory mindset from your book. Do you hate to lose or do you love to win? That's a great filter, isn't it? A great filter question.
Yeah. I actually got that from Derek Jeter. That was his big thing. He'd always ask that question. Hey, do you love to win or hate to lose? Which one? And we found that the guys that come at it from the position of, hey, I love to win. Yeah, who doesn't love to win? Everybody loves to win. But the guys that hated to lose, I mean, they were the ones, they played with a much different chip. There was almost a chip on that shoulder where it's like, hey, I got something to prove and nobody's getting in my way. So that was pretty cool. That was pretty cool when you come across guys like that.
Why don't I keep it at Jeter for a second? We haven't really you spoke about him a little bit, but I can think of my memories of his playing would just be a guy that seemed to glide. He seemed to be effortless. He didn't seem to exert. I mean, he made some spectacular plays, of course. I'm not saying that, but he just seemed to be a guy very in control, very consistent, extremely durable. Beyond the physical part, is there a mental takeaway you can take from your experiences with Derek Jeter?
The thing with Derek Jeter is he's the definition of consistent. He was a guy that just did the same thing every single day. And I always say, if you meet Derek Jeter, you're going to meet one of the most boring people you will ever meet. But that's what made him great. And that's what makes him great. What's cool about that is you just know who's walking in the room every day. It's not like there was, I'm going to get this guy today. I'm going to get Jekyll today. I'm going to get Hyde tomorrow. He was just Derek Jeter, just consistent mood, consistent attitude, consistent habits. The word that I would have to use is he's just a very, very consistent guy. And that's what I learned from him, but also just levels of being a pro. There was a standard that he also had and held himself to. Just as an example, like there'd be times when we always traveled in suits and ties under Joe Torre. But when Girardi took over, there'd be times during the road where it would be, hey, you could wear jeans and a blazer, or you can dress down for the flight. And you'd always see Derek Jeter in a three-piece suit. So what did other guys do? Three-piece suit. So even though the dress code was down, the entire plane would be filled with guys dressed to the nines. So it was about truly cherishing being a professional athlete and being a pro. And Derek did that better than anybody. Again, just a consistent guy in a way that you don't see very often. He did the same thing every single day. And I would say the fastest way to disrupt a Derek Jeter is to disrupt his daily routine, even by 10 minutes. But he was a guy, you knew where he was at 6, you knew where he was at 6:30, 6:40, 6:50. He had everything mapped out to the minute. The other thing that I saw with a guy like Derek Jeter, and it goes against how I was brought up in sport, was I was always told, hey, be the first one there and the last one to leave. And I saw Derek Jeter, he was the last one there and the first one to leave. But when he got there, it was all business, which was very interesting.
Compared to, there was plenty of guys where it was not all business.
Absolutely. There was a lot of guys, where it was a lot of hanging around, get there early, hang out. It was very different watching Derek do his thing. He was, again, the word I use is a consistent professional.
Let me take you to an area. I'm sure you've probably got a little feedback there. I'll be curious if you've had conversations with guys. So I've currently got a buddy. We've known each other since 6 years of age. He got up to AAA as a pitcher, got a rotator cuff tear, and then that was real tough to recover from. He's now a high school coach down in Florida. They've got a kid this year who's going to be a top 10 pick. I believe, I don't want to quote him wrong, but I believe the kid's name is Riley Green. So if anyone's listening and they think I'm actually just talking shit and this kid's not going to be a top 10 pick, he's easy to find in all the mock drafts. But I'm curious, when being around the guys that really arrived and got there, I mean, even just getting to the show is still a big thing. We're talking about the difference between guys getting to the show and Hall of Famers. Look, just getting to the show is huge. I'm curious, though, if any recommendations you would give or any insights you can give about the kids. I mean, look, for example, I just tell you about a kid who's 17 or 18. He's going to be a top 10 pick this year. What was that kid doing when he was 6 years old compared to his peers? Is it the same kind of thing? Is it somewhere these guys that get to be the stars in high school and the AAU and then get to college? I mean, they start super early, don't they? There's no rest for the wicked here.
Yeah, I think what you see is baseball's the type of game where the later you start, the harder it is. But there are guys that do start late. But ultimately, to get to the big leagues, what I've learned is, I feel bad almost saying this, but there's a God-given talent that's there. The skill set and the ability is so far above even just your average college player. I mean, the gap is huge.
Is it obvious to you? I mean, because for a lot of us, we don't have a chance to see that. Okay, maybe I've got some college experience, but to see that firsthand, it's got to be really amazing to see that gap.
Totally. I mean, it's the higher you go, the game gets faster and the field gets smaller. Guys are so fast that what would be a hit, let's just say in college, is no longer a hit because the outfielder gets to the ball that much faster. The infielder, closes the gap that much faster. But the bat speed is that much faster. The throwing velocities are that much faster. So it's a very, very different game. And I used to think that it would just come down to, well, listen, anybody can make it. If you just work hard, you could make it. And I can't lie anymore and say that statement. You have to have talent. And if you don't have talent, you got no chance. I mean, if you have talent and you work, wow, now you're lethal. But it's a very, very different game at the top. I mean, some guys don't work that much. And they're still so much more talented than the guy that may be a Division I player that works his butt off that just doesn't have that level of baseline talent.
Let me switch you into some of the physical and some of the training. For example, if we're going to look at the physical exercise that goes into the top guys that you worked with, or even myself right now, flexibility, range of motion, power. Talk about these issues and how you navigate. You've got someone, you're the strength coach at the New York Yankees, and you've got a rookie that's come up and he's only had minor league coaching. And then all of a sudden you get a hold of him and he's been on buses eating bad food, whatever. And you get a hold of him. How do you start to handle that? Walk us through some of that.
Well, the first thing we got to do is obviously pop the hood and see what's going on underneath there. So I start everybody off, no matter who I'm working with an assessment and evaluation to understand what's actually going on with that player. We start to understand, hey, how much range of motion does he have in his right hip versus his left hip, right shoulder versus left shoulder, throwing shoulder versus non-throwing shoulder? How much available rotation does he have? So when we start to find what the limitations are, then we can start to devise a customized plan for that particular player. What's his injury history? What are his pain patterns? How do we cross-reference injury history, pain patterns with performance? What's his body weight? What's his body fat? What's his circumference measurements? How's he performing and how's he feeling? So we take all of that data in, and then from there we start to formulate a plan, because if you can't just give a one-size-fits-all plan and program. And I say it like this, for me, I was basically a manager of $300 million in human capital. And I had to make sure that we were able to deploy that capital each and every day into, the playing market. And I had to make sure that these guys were ready to play. The only way I could do that is I had to know what was going on with each and every player and put together a process and a program for each player that had a starting point and was progressive, where each month, we were able to progress that program based on their body changing as a result of game volume, etc. So there's a science to it, as opposed to just like the general pop, where it's like, hey, what do you want to do today? You want to do spin? You want to do yoga? What do you want to do today? It wasn't the what do you want to do today, because there was too much on the line to look at it like that. You know what I mean? It was much more sequenced. It was much more, there were many more variables considered.
That's going to be book 2 for you.
Yeah, I know. I was going to write a book called Train Like a Pro.
I'm serious. That'd be the second interview. I want to hear that when I want to go down that path. Hey, you brought it up a second ago. I'm 50, so I'm about 7 years into it. I do pretty hardcore yoga classes in the heat. I'm currently in Southeast Asia, so it's pretty intense. Speak to yoga. That's one of these words where a lot of people hear this word and they think all kinds of crazy stuff. I can still do the full splits, and I love having that range of motion. I love having, because it keeps you young to some degree. I mean, but what has been the acceptance of something like yoga across pro athletes that you've seen? Or if they don't call it yoga, you're actually taking them through similar type training?
Yoga, mindfulness, meditation, all of that is somewhat, we'll say, new to the sports world. Some teams have adopted it, others have not. But what I have found just in my own journey in working with players is what I do is, I've always believed in integrating. I look at yoga as a tool. I look at Pilates as a tool. I look at visualization, mindset, mindfulness, meditation as a tool. And I work to integrate that into the whole. But just to answer the question straight up, is yoga a good thing for players? Well, I'll say it depends actually on the player, because at the level that I work, there's players that are hypermobile, meaning that they have too much mobility in their joints. And if you expose them to too much flexibility work and too much end range flexibility, you could actually lead to subluxations where the bones are popping out of the joints and you've created too much laxity. So that's a guy that wouldn't need it. Other players
can't touch your toes.
Yeah, they can't touch their toes. And then you have some of those guys that just don't like it. They don't like the structure of a full class. It's just not for them. So that's when we do a lot of manual type stretching where they're laying down. We take them through manuals, and then we take them through some active stuff afterwards to hold that range of motion.
So I can't call you a Thai masseuse, but you've got somewhat of a Thai massage understanding.
Yeah, exactly. Very similar to that. I talk about meditation, right? It's very similar. I talk about it very similar to yoga. Meditation is on one side of the continuum. On the other side is just making somebody aware of their thoughts. So if somebody's just getting into this whole mindfulness world or mindfulness continuum, we need to take them through a process before they can get to full phase, full-fledged meditation. It may be, hey, I want you to walk without your phone today. I want you to be off your phone for X amount of time. So it's the same with yoga. We have to graduate players to that. I never believed in just throwing guys right in, because the resistance when I've done that has been very high. So I create partial exposures. And by doing that, it opens their eyes to something that they've never felt before. And then they want to go deeper in.
I'm guessing your manual manipulation, that kind of my using the shorthand of saying Thai massage, I'm guessing that alone probably brought people into an understanding of what it was, because that could feel really nice to have somebody, we're not talking about, for you folks out there that have only had your silly massage with someone rubbing oil on you. We're not talking that. We're talking heavy duty.
Yeah. Something that, again, I always talk about differentiators. One of my differentiators, as a performance coach was this. I realized early in my career that mental stress has to go somewhere. And oftentimes it ends up in your tissue.
That's a huge statement that most people do not know deep in their bones. That's so true.
Yeah. So you would have, so if you think about it, if you're stressed out in any way, whether it's about performance, whether it's about relationship, even travel, don't forget, guys, we're not sleeping that much. We're on the road and doing all that. That stress has to go somewhere. And what I found is it ended up in the tissue. And you'd find guys have low back issues. You'd have guys that have chronic aches and pains. So what I would do is I would actually go tissue by tissue. I'd go, upper extremity, lower extremity, and start to release the muscle tissue. And in releasing the muscle tissue, you'd give these guys almost like emotional releases that they weren't able to get any other way. And the other thing I would remind them of, listen, the higher your mental stress, the greater your tissue stress. And when you take velocity and combine that with tissue stress, either high rotary force or high sprinting force, your chances of injury go way up just by integrating this soft tissue protocol that I came up with, and then following that up.
Hold on, is that going to be book 3?
I know, right? I know I can put a lot of them together. This is it's really hard to put it all in a book. This is more. I'm eventually thinking of running these like recharge weekends where guys could actually come in and people could come in and experience this. But ultimately, if we could reduce total systematic stress, mental and physical, we would reduce our predisposition for injury as well as daily aches and pains. And that was, again, another place of buy-in for players.
What I love hearing you say that is I'm the last 22 years, I can't believe it's that long now, but the last 22 years, I've gotten a very decent, hard, strong massage 4 times a month. And I didn't plan it. So when I hear you talk, I'm able to kind of get more of that feeling of why I've gotten addicted to it, why it's my recovery, why it's my bringing the emotional state down. And you kind of have got the science behind it, the expertise behind it, and know exactly why we should all be doing this.
Yeah, it's totally real. It's an amazing thing. And I started doing it with executives that I coach as well, CEOs, traders, hedge fund managers. And it's amazing to see, like, they come in jacked up and all of a sudden they leave and they're like, they've totally melted. So it's amazing how you can kind of, I call it downshifting the nervous system, through temperature and pressure. It's amazing how that works.
Whether it's the massage or something like yoga, that post experience, that post feeling, that post bliss, you can't pay for that. You can't get that in a pill. You can't get that from a beer. You can't get that from a shot of whiskey. You can only get it from that.
Yeah, it's an amazing response that the body just loves it. So I always say, if you haven't gotten any sort of tissue work, you really want to think about getting some and being open to it, because it could change your life.
Hey, as we're winding down, I want to throw a couple more things at you. Mike Mussina, I believe he just got in the Hall of Fame, didn't he? I think he just got elected, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Yep.
So you've got this great line. You quote him, "You are what you are." I love that. Why don't you explain behind that?
I like to put a little star with that. I say you are what you are, and you are what you choose to be. The star is what you choose to be. But he always says you are what you are, because we would see players that they come in, they'd be on their best behavior. It's kind of like, the month of January for many people. They do their best, they're on top of their diet. And then all of a sudden they go back to their old habits and their old ways. And they just can't push through the headwinds that they're going to face trying to be something new and become something new. And they end up going back to what they have always been. So we would say if somebody's a 220 hitter that has happening this year to hit 300, the chances of him hitting 220 next year are way higher than him hitting 300. And it's the same for so many people. And that's why I always say, you talk about January, New Year's resolution. By now we're at March and most people have already forgotten what their goals were, in January. So it's the same kind of thing. You are what you are. The chances of you going back to what you were before you decided to make a change are a lot higher than you becoming something new and something different and something better, just because so many people often they quit, they quit in the process. Process is hard.
Yeah, process is hard. Too many people focus on the outcome. They don't think about the process.
100%. And what the best do is they focus on the process and let the outcomes create themselves as a result of the process.
I got one last one. Chapter 11 of your book. I love this word. I've written some books too, and I'd love to get this word in. I don't think I've ever put this. I mean, I've loved the word. I know the word, but you got to have moxie. Explain that. Explain that. It's so good. I mean, it's such a great place to kind of end up on, but you got to have moxie regardless of what you're going to do in life.
Yeah, so I definitely have to give credit for this to my mother. My mother is one of these tough ladies from Queens, New York, that is just a relentless person that, and she bites your leg, it's like, hey, you can't get her off. But as a kid, I was always brought up to say, hey, what's the worst somebody could tell you? No. And if they tell you no, you just keep going and find somebody else and you say, next, who's next, 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 next. So, moxie it's just another word for guts. You got to have guts. You got to have fight. You have to have the tenacity to overcome anything that comes your way. And you can't forget, again, it just reaffirms that your strength comes from within, and don't let the externals affect your internal power and internal strength. And we have so much more control than we think, but we have to remind ourselves of that. So I always say a little reminder, hey, you got to have moxie, you got to have moxie, you got to have guts if you want to make it in this world. And that's make it in whatever it is you want to do, whether it's business or sports, or you want to be a great parent. Like, it all takes guts and it all takes work. You got to be ready for that battle. So that was a great little reminder. And, my mother continues to get on me every day to make sure that I'm pushing and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, whatever that may be. She never told me what to do, but she just told me that whatever I do, it'll be required of me to have that moxie.
The book, Habits of a Champion, Nobody Becomes a Champion by Accident. It's a great quick read, but it's one of these things where you pick it up and you really can, and I think you say this in the book, but I kind of learned it on my own because I'm holding it in my hands. You can kind of just pick it up anywhere, and there's like a sentence you just pull, and you're kind of like, oh, damn, I feel motivated now. It's kind of one of those, I kind of get where you went with it. It's nice. I love those kinds of books where you can just pick it up anywhere, and you're kind of like, you walk away, even if you don't sit down and read the whole thing right then and there, you walk away with a feeling of like, okay, I needed that reminder.
Right. And that's what I said. I said, you got to just read it with an open mind, skip chapters if you like. They're really in no particular order, but they kind of are. And one of the lines I said is, someone once told me that your life should turn like the pages in a book, one after another, one chapter after the next. I never really agreed with that way of being. We can't always predict what's going to happen next, but, I ultimately wanted the book to be more than a book and more of a handbook, something you can keep in your back pocket and say, you know what? Yeah, I remember that one point there. Yep, I'm getting too fast. Sometimes you got to slow down to speed up. Never get too high, never get too low. And a lot of my coaching business and coaching practice that I have now is built on the lessons in the book. Again, it's a handbook that happens to be a book.
Dana, where can we send people? Where's the best place for people to go and find you? The book, Amazon, I'm assuming. Where's the best place for people to go to find you and check you out, reach out to you?
So DanaCavalea.com is where it's kind of my home base. You can get to my YouTube, my Twitter, and all that other stuff there. But DanaCavalea.com. And the book is on Amazon. So you can get the book there just a couple clicks away. But ultimately, I love being a resource to people. So if you read the book, say hello after you read it. I love the interactions. I do a daily blog as well on leadership that kind of reinforces what's written in the book as well. And that's on DanaCavalea.com as well.
Dana, I appreciate it. And I am dead serious. I really want to see book 2 on the strength and conditioning exercises and book 3 on the body manipulation. So you got plenty of work ahead of you.
We'll get it. We'll get it done. Don't worry.
Hey, take care, man. I thank you for coming on.
All right. I appreciate you. Thank you.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.